And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Good afternoon. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist John Cowen with your marine forecast. We'll start off looking at sea ice for our offshore areas. As you can see, the Beaufort Sea, Chukchi Sea have both filled in with ice. Ice beginning to now move its way south through the Bering Strait, and our shore-fast ice continues to thicken for most areas. However, we do have some warmer air that'll be moving north, especially in the southeastern Bering over the next few days that could impede the ice development in that area. Taking a look at our pattern for tonight, you can see we have our low pressure system south of the eastern Aleutians, and that's going to be the driver for most of our weather pattern across the state. Cooler air continuing to work its way into the Aleutians with mixed wintry precipitation for most of those areas. And as we come across to the northern Gulf Coast, you can see we have rain for most areas of the immediate coast with that warmer air that's moving north. Much of the Panhandle again seeing rain as well. And then coming into Wednesday, you can see our front continues to move north, slowly pulling that warm air north with it. Again, rain showers expected for much of the immediate coastline with a stalled front in this area. Next low pressure system starts making its way into the southern Gulf of Alaska by Wednesday. And then over towards the Aleutians, again, colder air continuing to spill down from the north, keeping things cool and generally wintry precipitation extended for much of the Aleutians. And then finally into Thursday, again, colder air continuing to be pulled from the north across the Bering Sea. We have a stalled trough across much of the interior, again leading to snow showers in this area and generally warmer weather for the most part. And then our low pressure system here in the Gulf of Alaska continues to strengthen, and this will be the next weather maker later this week into the weekend as another heavy rain event is expected for the Panhandle. Let's take a look at our marine forecast for Wednesday. You can see winds generally around 25 to 30 knots out of the southeast, with seas around 14 to 15 feet in the offshore areas, and then from Skagway down to Ketchikan, generally about 15 to 25 knots or so, again out of the south to southeast. Seas generally around 3 to 5 feet, even 8 feet down towards Ketchikan. And then by Thursday, things settling down a little bit, winds turning more easterly, around 20 knots or so, seas coming down to about 8 to 10 feet for the offshore areas, and then 15 to 25 knots out of the southeast for these interior areas. Again, Ketchikan around 6 foot seas, and then 3 to 5 feet as we go farther north. And then Wednesday's forecast for the Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound areas. Farther inland, offshore winds generally out of the northeast around 15 to 20 knots or so, leading to 3 foot seas up to 6 feet in Prince William Sound. Offshore areas are going to be mainly easterly, a little bit of southeasterly as we go south of Seward, around 25 to 30 knots or so, seas about 10 to 12 feet in that area. And then by Thursday, again, things generally calming down, 10 to 15 knots for the inner areas, generally offshore winds out of the northeast again, pretty low sea state, and then in the offshore areas, winds east to southeasterly around 20 to 25 knots, seas coming down to about 8 feet. And then Wednesday's forecast for southeastern Alaska, winds generally again about 15 to 25 knots from the Pacific side, seas about 8 to 10 feet in that area. And on the Bering side, things pretty light and variable, 10 knots or so with very omnidirectional in this area, seas only about 2 to 3 feet on the Bering side. And then by Thursday, things calming down even more, variable on the Bering side, now starting to calm down on the Pacific side, around 15 knots out of the north for most of these areas, and seas around 5 to 6 feet. Coming over to the central and western Bering, you can see by Wednesday we have winds generally around 20 to 25 knots out of the north to northwest for most areas, with seas about 6 to 10 feet for most areas, those higher sea states generally from Kiska west. And then by Thursday, calming down to around 20 knots, generally out of the northwest again for most areas, seas coming down to about the 6 to 10 foot range for most areas. And then across the eastern Bering, we can see winds generally about 25 knots or so, although we do have the shore-fast ice in this area. Offshore areas seeing seas up to about 10 to 12 feet or so. And then by Thursday, again calming down, even towards St. Paul Island, seeing winds around 20 knots out of the north to northwest. Seas coming down to about 8 feet. And then across the north slope, some pretty strong winds for Wednesday, up to about 40 miles an hour or so north of Kaktovik. So pretty strong winds, but again, sea ice has developed across this area, so not too impactful as far as seas go there. And then by Thursday, winds calming down pretty substantially across this area, about 10 to 15 knots or so out of the north to northwest. And that'll wrap up our marine forecast. I'm meteorologist John Cowen.